Hello and welcome to Fraud Talk, the ACFE's monthly podcast. I'm Rihonna Scoggins, the content manager for the ACFE, and today I'm joined by David Maimon. In today's episode of Fraud Talk, we're pulling back the curtain on a scheme targeting an unlikely group, death row inmates. Dr. David Maimon, head of fraud insights at CentiLink, professor at Georgia State University, and a leading expert in financial cybercrime, joins us to expose how fraudsters are mining prison records to create synthetic identities, slipping past the very systems meant to detect them. But this isn't just one scheme. It's part of a larger underground economy, a hidden network where identities are bought, sold, and rented through encrypted channels, where criminals exploit gaps in digital onboarding and KYC processes, and where fraud has evolved into a scalable, service-based business model. Stay with us as we unpack how this ecosystem operates and what it means for the future of fraud prevention. David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I'm curious, you have a lot of experience, but I wanted to ask you before we get into our questions, how did you get to where you are today? Where did your interest in these dark web marketplaces even begin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm often get asked that. To be frank, I wasn't planning on doing that. After I graduated with my PhD in sociology, I didn't really like the type of research I was doing back then, which was focused more on neighborhoods and how the neighborhood within you live in influence your deviant outcomes, things like suicide and violent traits and so on. And so I told my wife that one of the things I want to do is I want to sort of quit everything and just go and pursue another PhD in marine biology. And what I really wanted to do is I wanted to chase the giant squid. And I don't know if you know anything about the giant squid and the dips. We don't know enough about the dips. But you have all these marine biologists who take a submarine. They get funding from governments or other agencies. They get inside a submarine. They go in the deeps. They turn on the flashlight, and everywhere they look, they find new animals, like new creatures we haven't really knew about. And so that's what I wanted to do. And my wife said at the time, you can do that, but on your own. I'm not going to be poor for 4 more years. And so because of that, I decided to pursue my academic career in the context of sociology and criminology, but I was looking for something new to do. And I realized that cybercrime was one of those areas where at the time there wasn't a whole lot of meaningful work. The darknet and other platforms started to become popular among criminals. And so I have to say that I was able to find a replacement, right? In the context of the deeps in the darknet. So every day is pretty much going there, turning on my flashlight and finding new things. That's how I got to do the darknet and text message application research I'm doing right now.
Interesting. Okay. So from death row identities to Telegram fraud bazaars, we're going to dig into sort of the darkest corners of identity theft, synthetic fraud, and the criminal supply chain that makes it all work. You're, at least from my knowledge, one of the few researchers studying fraud from the ground level. You're monitoring these forums, interacting in these cybercrime spaces. What does your day-to-day look like?
It's a great question. I actually thought a little bit about it, and I thought about how I summarize it in one word, and I think the right word for my day, so to speak, is just listen. That's what I do, right? I listen on a daily basis to what's going on some of the darknet markets out there, what's going on social media, on text message applications. I speak to many fraud fighters, a lot of chief fraud officers as well in major financial institutions, folks who work for the government, and because of this question, and reflecting about what is it that I do on a daily basis, I find that most of what I do is listen. So early in the morning, I turn on the computer. If it's not on, listen to what the criminals are talking about in some of the platforms I just mentioned. Then I usually will have some meetings with students and then listen to what they find on their end. I have a lot of meetings, of course, with folks from the company, listen to what folks are finding there. And then once I listen to all those individuals and observe some of the signals that they are seeing on their end or put out there, if you talk about the criminals and what they advertise and talk about on darknet, text message application, but also more and more Facebook and Instagram and other social media platforms. I go to my office, I sit, I try to sort of make sense out of everything I found, understand or reflect whether we're looking at new trends that folks are working on, whether they're hitting specific organizations or not, how they're doing what they're doing. And so once I gather my thoughts, I simply start writing. I start to build presentations, I write interesting content, and then share with the industry, share with my peers, share with my colleagues in the company, share with my students, share with folks on LinkedIn. I talk to many people in many conferences, and that gives me an opportunity to share some of the knowledge that I'm able to gather. But I guess the bottom line of my day is as I just listen.
So listening and sharing sounds pretty.
Mostly listening, though. Sharing, I really like about the sharing. Sharing is, I mean, I know that many people, probably are familiar with me because I'm talking a lot on stages and on podcasts, but the majority of the day is focused on listening. So
Interesting. So sort of a broad question, but what makes fraud today more scalable or efficient than even a few years ago? I think some people probably have an idea of what that answer might be, but what would you say?
yeah, I'll probably my answer probably will be very similar to answers of other fraud fighters. I think technology and the fact that folks have access to all those tools, which will allow them to either engage in fraud or learn about how to engage in fraud, or essentially become part of a fraud ring, is the reason for this dramatic increase in fraud that we're seeing here in the United States, and to be frank, all over. I mean, this is not a unique phenomenon for the United States. I think fraud all over. Definitely in the Western civilizations are involved in. I mean, we're seeing a lot of people interested in engaging in fraud, simply because the threshold is so low at the moment. Like, if you think about it, in the past, if you wanted to do fraud, you needed to actually know what to do. You needed to know the right people. You needed to have the connection, and it took some time to figure out. It took some time to learn how to engage in fraud and what will be successful, how to con individuals, which targets you want to focus on, because the fraud is such a broad concept. You can target so many different types of individuals or organizations, as you know. So it took time. Now it's all online. I mean, you can go on Facebook or Instagram, and you will see a lot of people talking about fraud and talking about their successful fraudulent operations. You'll be able to find a lot of tutorials. You'll be able to find a lot of people who will agree to work with you as a mule if you're a kid, if you're 16 years old. And so the threshold, unfortunately, because of technology, because of the fact that we're all online constantly, because of the fact that we're all on Instagram and social media, and we want to flash and talk about whatever we do on a daily basis, is one of the major reasons for this dramatic increase in fraud that we're seeing in the United States and of course across North America, in my opinion.
Absolutely. That lower threshold has really spiked things. So With that lower thresholds, we've also seen fraudsters becoming more organized. And you've talked about fraud as an ecosystem. Can you break that down for us? What roles exist? Who are the key players? How's labor divided?
Yeah, I mean, I really love the ecosystem metaphor. So it's not really a metaphor. It's really an ecosystem. When we think about an ecosystem, at least in my mind, I'm kind of, you know, drawing this on my research in the context of neighborhood when I was doing that line of work. And we're talking about a community of living organisms who interact with each other and their physical environment. And the fact that you have different actors interacting with the environments, the interactions, the junctions which are formed between the different actors and the actors in the environment, that essentially what makes an ecosystem. If we think about it in the context of fraud, I mean, we are seeing evidence for the existence of this ecosystem because you have several actors. You have fraudsters, you have guardians, folks who are trying to protect us all from becoming a victim of fraud. You have the victims, or let me say targets/victims, and you have enablers, those individuals who support the criminal's operations by writing malware or facilitating opportunities to sell commodities. You're seeing those four actors interacting with each other all the time in the environment, in the different environments that they live in, so to speak. I mean, and the environment could be or can span the ClearNet, the regular network that we're using right now, darknet, text message applications, darknet, of course, but also physical space. These guys interact with each other constantly, and on all these physical as well as online space, and by doing that, they actually create this ecosystem of online fraud. So yeah, I mean, those actors are very active, and during the last, I would say, 6 years or so, we're seeing more and more activity on the ecosystem, and I think because of the fact that we're seeing more and more people wanting in, the ecosystem is vibrant. The ecosystem is quite lively, quite resistant to folks trying to change things, and that essentially what drives fraud up.
So you mentioned it earlier with your listening, right? What are some of the most active channels right now for this activity? What are you listening to?
At this point, I can tell you that folks are all over the place. I can tell you that we see a lot of fraudsters being open about what they do on Facebook. We see them on Instagram. We see them on TikTok. Of course, we see a lot going on the darknet. Several darknet markets, which are very active. A lot of darknet forums, very very active as well. Text message applications. Telegram used to be very popular till last year, something along those lines. But with the arrest of the CEO and founder of the company, and the fact that law enforcement started to have more scrutiny on Telegram, we're seeing folks using other text message applications. We see folks using WhatsApp. We see folks using Signal, Jabbar. Potato is one of those text message applications we see a lot of movement towards too. So yeah, I mean, it's all these channels that folks feel comfortable sharing and talking about fraud. One interesting observation I may share here is the fact that folks are not, at least from where I sit, are more cautious about what they share and how they share. Because at the end of the day, if you think about the last 5 years, at the beginning of, when I actually started around COVID and a couple of months before COVID, folks were sharing everything. Like we were seeing like emos and tutorials and faces, the context of the different trends we were seeing out there. Now there's still a lot going on. I mean, there's a lot of people sharing, but you see folks are more hesitant to share videos of themselves, with their faces uncovered. Folks will change their voices. Folks will blur some of the information that they will blur some of the information that they share on the platforms. So if you think about the progression of this, I mean, you still see a lot of fraudsters share a lot of useful information that law enforcement and fraud fighter can use, but it's not to the degree it used to be like 2 or 3 years ago.
So, sort of continuing on with that, when I was writing Fraud for Sale for Fraud Magazine early last year, you were generous enough to share your insights, and thank you again for that. One of the things we touched on when we were talking was how fraudsters are leveraging, right, these encrypted messaging platforms or automation tools, and we're seeing even bots being used to scale their operations. Since then, have you seen the technology behind these fraud as a service operations evolve even further? What tools or maybe even infrastructure are enabling these networks now?
Yeah, one of the cool things, as I mentioned earlier in the conversation, that I like about this ecosystem is the fact that things are changing constantly. And so, yeah, I mean, since the last time we've discussed, Gen AI sort of entered the ecosystem, and folks are now using it more and more in the context of the bots they're designing and writing, in the context of the different types of scams they're putting together. And so I think Gen AI is definitely something we need to be worried about at this point. And I don't know if a few of the listeners have heard, but Sam Altman a couple of days ago actually suggested that Gen AI is being used heavily by fraudsters at this point. I mean, we've been talking about it since 2023. But I guess now ChatGPT has a lot of evidence suggesting that yes, I mean, a lot of people are trying to use the tool, not only ChatGPT, of course, but other tools like Grok and DeepSeek and other to try to tailor different scams, support the operation of different fraudulent bots, and so on in the context of their operation. So yeah, I mean, this is the most important development that entered the field since we've discussed, and it pretty much support the infrastructure, support the scams, support the MOs of most types of fraud out there at the moment.
And I think that ties back again to what you were talking about earlier with that lower threshold to fraud and to getting into that space.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's fairly easy to try and come up with ways to con individuals. I mean, you can have the tool, if you know what you're doing, give you a list of like a list of instructions with respect to how to perform specific types of fraudulent activities. The tool will actually guide you in different types of fraudulent operations if you know how to ask it and how to approach it. It will help you manufacture content that you'll be able to use in the operation. So just an example, I mean, smishing and phishing. In the past, folks were using one of the major flags for detecting a phishing attempt was, folks were telling us just look at the email, and you see a lot of grammar issues. You will see a lot of sentences which do not make sense. That's a huge indication. That was a huge indication that you were dealing with scammers. Nowadays, you work with ChatGPT. ChatGPT will manufacture an amazing phishing email coming from your bank or from the government, which will be very similar to the emails that the legitimate organizations are saying. So yeah, I mean, the prevalence of Gen AI, along with the lower threshold to actually get involved with fraud and fraud rings, is part of the reason why we're seeing this increase in fraud.
Absolutely. So, sort of switching gears, because I think most people in the fraud space could talk about how AI is changing everything, probably forever. Let's get into sort of the bigger topic. You discovered a fraud ring using identities of death row inmates. How did this come to your attention?
Yeah, it's really interesting actually how we got to work on that. Yeah, this line of research is research that we performed along with a company I'm part of, Centrelink, and the way we got to work on it was that one of our partners asked us to look at a specific identity that they were working on, and that has asked to open a new account with them. And they suspected that they were working with someone who provided a fake driver license. And so they asked us to take a look. And so we did. And once we looked at the address and the profile of the individual, we realized immediately that the identity has been stolen and that it belongs to a death row inmate in Texas. Once we decided to dive deeper into the address, we realized that the address has been associated with other death row inmates, folks who were stealing their identities. And so from that point on, what we've done, we downloaded the list of death row inmates in Texas, and we went one by one to try and figure out whether we had evidence of folks using the identities. And lo and behold, we realized that 10% of the identities have been used in the context of identity theft attempts. Folks were stealing the identities, were trying to opening bank accounts with the identities. Some of the identities have been used to establish and create new businesses as well. One of the interesting anecdotes in that story is that we're able to find one identity related to one of the address which was tied to many death row inmate, but we couldn't really find indication that that person was on the death row. Like the one of the identities that was associated with address was not really part of the list we were working on. So we went online and we realized that there's a reason for that, and the reason was that that person was executed a few months, after we started the investigation. And so a really interesting trend, another really interesting finding from that analysis was that some of the individuals seems to be still cohabiting, so to speak, in some of those addresses the criminals were using. So there was one specific address in Texas where there were two death row inmates associated with. In the time we were essentially looking at the file. So that essentially means that the fraudster was still using the identities when we looked at them. So really interesting investigation on that one.
Yeah, interesting. So can you sort of walk us through how were they building these identities? Like what tools or data were they using? How did they even get access to that?
So they were using the identities like you will use a synthetic identity, which is really interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, I mean, stealing the identity, I mean, they had access to the identity from the official websites, where inmates information is being available. So it's not that big of a deal to essentially just go to the website, download the data, and start working with them. So in a way, they were just stealing the identity. We're looking for information about social security numbers of those individuals. They're looking for legacy phones and things of that nature to sort of try and supplement it. But from that point forward, essentially what they were doing is a very similar thing to what any identity thief will do. Try to use the identity in order to create bank accounts. Usually, before that, they will try to establish a telephone line associated with the identity, and then create bank accounts, establish businesses, and then the goal, at least the way we are seeing it, the goal is essentially a bust out, right? I mean, so you want to groom the identity to a point where the bank will feel comfortable allowing you with a loan, with a big loan, $50,000-$100,000, and then you run away with the money. So in that sense, the tools are very similar to the tools folks are working with when they work with stolen identities. manufacture a fake driver license, fake social security card for the identity, and simply start working with that online.
So how did they avoid or circumvent our common controls like credit bureau alerts or identity validation steps? How was this not caught earlier?
Yeah, it's a great question. One important thing to understand about the credit bureaus: credit bureaus will not have alerts on someone's incarceration. Only in rare cases with a lot of publicity around them, maybe they will have a flag, but most of the time, the credit bureau will not have information about, your criminal record, so to speak. Right? I mean, essentially, they're interested in your credit history. And that's what. And one of the cool things about sort of working with this kind of identity is that those individuals did have some credit history, right? I mean, they did have some history that other individuals will have. The brilliant thing about using incarcerated individual identities is that they will not have the same scrutiny about their identity like you and I will. I mean, you will not be able to detect that someone is using your identity because you're incarcerated. You probably will not get the mail saying, someone just opened a bank account for you and so on, right? I mean, so in that sense, it's really interesting. This operation is really interesting.
What surprised you most about this operation? Was it the scale? You've mentioned some really interesting things like the simplicity, or was it something else?
It's really the simplicity and the fact that if you don't have the solution, this kind of theft attempts will become successful. In order to really prevent this kind of incidents, as well as incident of synthetic identities, you need to have the right solutions or the right mindset in order to try and detect them. And if you don't have it, then you'll be taken for a ride. So to me, what was really interesting again was how these guys were essentially grooming the identities, like they were using a synthetic identity. They were trying to create public records with the stolen identities. They were using it over and over again till they were able to get to where they needed the identity to be, and that is to a point where a bank will agree to open a bank account. Both for the individual as well as for some of the businesses they were able to create.
It's such an interesting topic, and I want to, kind of bring it home and sort of what our listeners can learn. What are some subtle red flags that a fraud examiner at home or an analyst might miss or overlook with synthetic identities?
It's a really great question. Synthetic identities have been an issue for a while now, and just to make sure that we were all on the same page, like you and I and the listeners are on the same page. When we're talking about synthetic identities, we're not talking about stolen identities. We're talking about either completely bogus identities, which have name, date of birth, social security numbers of individuals who do not exist, or we're talking about first-party synthetic, which are individuals who essentially take their own names and date of birth and merge it with either a stolen social security number or a completely bogus one. Right? I mean, so in that sense, synthetic identities have been around for a while, and one of the challenges of financial institutions and other institutions when they're trying to sort of verify someone's identity and flagging the identities is the fact that when you see the identity looks legit. Mm-hmm. And the identity will also have public records around it and a story around it, which will make the identity looks like, yeah, this is the identity I want to do business with. Because, I don't know how many of the listeners know, but fraudsters take time to grow and groom those identities. And so what they will do with the identity is once you create it, so to speaking, is you will try to open an email account for it. You will be able to open an email account for it. You will try to then have a telephone line associated with it. Then one of the things folks will do with synthetic identities in order to boost confidence among financial institutions and other organizations that they are trying to con in working and dealing with the identity is they will try to have a credit score, a good credit score for the identity. And the way they will do that is they will go online, and the listeners and you can go online and you can find those websites as well, and they will ask for folks to add them as a secondary user on their thread lines. Once you do that, you can either ask for someone to add you as a secondary user or a thread line, or you can actually buy a thread line yourself, like a zombie deadline, and then add the identity to it, like have the identity to be have the thread line reported directly to the identity. You will have a credit score associated with it. So once you have all that, the identity looks completely legit, right? And everybody would want to work with it. So in terms of the signals, going back to your question, right? Unless you have oversight of, the history around the identity, and unless you sort of have various databases which will allow you to track when have you first seen the identity, where have you first seen the identity, does the social security number associated with the age of the identity make sense or not? If you don't have all these tools and signals in place, most likely you will want to do business with those individuals, and you will be open yourself to risk of a bust up.
Interesting. So you mentioned earlier about how those death row inmates, their information was public. It was public record, right? On the inverse, how can public data sources or social media, open source intelligence help with validation in these sorts of investigations?
It definitely can, but it's not a perfect solution, right? Because the criminals know that folks will be looking for the social media platforms for verification purposes. So oftentimes we see it a lot in context of employment scams now, right? I mean, so folks will steal other people's identities. They will apply for a job, and they will have a LinkedIn page associated with the identity, right? But you, as the recruiter, you don't have any insight with respect to the work history of that specific profile you're looking at. So social media is definitely important for gathering more intelligence about an identity you're working with. The problem is that the criminals know that. And so in addition to that, you need to have access to databases and tools which will allow you to flag the fact that you potentially are looking at an identity which doesn't make any sense. The social security number, for example, simply does not make any sense in the context of the year. It was sort of assigned to the individual. Date of birth does not match with the social security number. You look at things like telephone numbers. You need to look at IP addresses from which folks are communicating with you. There are a lot of factors that needs to be taken into consideration when you're trying to assess the risk with an identity. Social media could definitely help, but it's definitely not the perfect solution for raising red flags.
Absolutely. It's sort of a tool in the toolbox, if you
will.
will.
Yeah, definitely. One of the tools out there for sure.
So we've talked a bit about how organized these networks are and these groups. How should fraud teams shift their thinking from catching individual cases to maybe spotting these networks or patterns?
I think it's a great question, Rihonna. I mean, and I think the answer for that is just allowing folks to do what we do, and that is spend time out there looking into cases, looking into the fraud ecosystem without having clear deliverables. And I know that right now, a lot of organizations are cutting budgets and slashing fraud fighting budgets. But at the end of the day, if at least in my mind, if you really want to understand fraud, if you really want to have some impact and disrupt effectively, what you need to do is you need to be out there with the criminals, understanding what they're working on, how they're doing what they're doing, who they are targeting, when they are targeting those individuals. Try to come up with some assessment with respect to when are you going to see that on your turf, so speaking, as well. And I think that once you have all this information, you'll be able to respond in a more effective way to the issue. I know our CEO, the Centrelink CEO, keeps telling me that I have the most fun job in the company, simply because, as I mentioned earlier, I'm just out there listening and try to understand what folks are doing. But at the end of the day, that is the key, in my opinion, to think about fraud prevention. You don't know everything. The fraudsters will constantly try to find holes and ways to defraud you. If you really want to understand what they're doing, you need to be out there with them, swim with them, so to speaking, and try to prevent accordingly.
Absolutely. So, final question, pretty easy one, I would say. Where can listeners follow your work or access your findings? How can they keep up with the work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very loud, I would say, on LinkedIn. I put a lot of content on LinkedIn. Of course, we publish a lot of content on the company website, centrelink.com. My academic research group, we also make all our papers available to the public, ebcs.gsu.edu. We, of course, publish in scientific papers. I'm now contributing to Forbes, so I put a lot of content there as well. I mean, we're all over the place. I mean, all you have to do is just Google me, and I assume you'll be able to find a link to some of the content.
Perfect. Well, David, thank you so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed our conversation and also getting to catch up from not getting to speak for quite a while. So this was wonderful.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great, and I look forward to getting together in the future.
Perfect. And thank you for listening. You can find this podcast along with all other episodes of Fraud Talk on acfe.com, Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This has been Rihonna Scoggins, signing off.